If we want to take our seats and everyone wants to put us back on live online, I'll have Cathy and Jacob come on up at the chairs. So with us today is Cathy Evans and Jacob Surratt. Cathy's with Pace Equity and Jacob's with Steadfast City Economic Community Partners. I will let them dive into the background and introductions for themselves, other than to say that in this particular project, what we want to be able to share, or session we want to share with you, is what does a project life look like? Where does it start? Not just from our eyes as the administrators, but the funders and the property owners and the developers. So I think this will be very insightful for all of you. And with that, Cathy, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Super excited to be here. It's the first annual Missouri Pace Summit. My name is Cathy Evans. I'm the managing director for Pace Equity in Missouri. Here we are. And I'm going to be presenting the life of a C-PACE project in the eyes of the lender. I've been funding Pace since 2016. And Pace Equity has been funding since 2014. Every lender is a little bit different, so I'm going to take you through what Pace Equity does and how they manage their process. So everything starts with a term sheet typically. Once I engage with the developer, everybody wants to know, okay, where are we going to be on terms? So with that, typically this is the information that we're going to be requesting. We can either do a mini term sheet, which is pretty much just, okay, this is going to be what the stabilized value is. Therefore, we should be able to get you 25 to 30%. But with that information, that's not always accurate. So if we have more information, if we've got an appraisal, the construction budget, if we've got sources and uses, we'll take a look at financials, anything that we have that can better give us more information on the project, then that term sheet is going to be more accurate and your eligible spend is going to be more accurate. Next page. So when you say yes to the term sheet with Pace Equity, we're going to issue you a full binding commitment. Next page. And this is the process right here. So when you're looking at analyze, so we're going to look at the initial analysis. We're going to take a look at the financial review. So we're looking at pro formas. We're looking at the construction budget. We're looking at the pay statute. We're looking at the eligible spend. The construction budget is we're going to pull that apart. It's going to go for a second review and we're going to issue that term sheet. Once you say yes, we're going to go right to commitment. And from there, we start working on the project. So the first step is we're going to do that MEI information form. If the county if the county or municipality has already opted in, we're going to move forward and we're going to start working on collecting the documents on the conditions for the due diligence list. From there, we're going to set up a meeting with the bank. We're going to go for lender consent. As long as we get a verbal lender consent, we're going to move forward with processing the financing. Now, something that's different with Pace Equity is we do have in-house energy engineering. We've got a full staff that handles this process. If you've got another Pace provider, some of those will go with a third-party energy engineering team. If you already have done that, we'll also accept that energy analysis, but we do have an in-house engineering team. From there, we're going to be maximizing your eligible spend. We're going to be taking a look at that scope, and we're going to see if we can maximize the term with the average weighted lifespan of those improvements. We're going to get the building design optimization. And that's another category that's going to be spoken on later down the road. And that's our Cirrus low carbon. We don't have any external reviews to slow you down. This is our money. This is Pace Equity's money. So we're going to be funding this directly. At this point, if all the documents are in, we're going to give an authorization to close. From there, we go to legal engagement. So we're going to bring in our legal team. We're going to engage with the senior lender and their legal team, and we're going to move this to closing. From there, we're going to reach out to the PACE administrator, and we're going to go for program approval. And then we do our closing calls. So we'll just have some meetings set up, make sure that everything has been checked off the list on the due diligence list. And there we go to close. So we're going to execute the closing documents, and we're going to fund. So depending on if it's a recapitalization PACE, that would fund into an escrow account and pull directly into the property owner's own funds because they've already paid for those. If it is new construction or redevelopment, it's going to fund into escrow, and then we will work with the senior lender's draw schedule and fund pro rata. And that's it. Do you have any questions?
So now it's going to be Jacob Surratt from Steadfast Community Partners.
It's gonna sit right in front of my notes. Okay, there we go. We'll make it work. And most of what I'm going to talk about is coming at this from historic. Oh, we have a new microphone. I think they need a new podium. Most of this presentation is going to come looking at historic renovations. However, one of the first appraisals I actually did was of an upgrade using PACE capital of a 1980s office complex in Creve Coeur. And did just want to touch on that. The way PACE works, and it does hit your tax bill. So unlike tax abatement, that's going to increase the value, PACE is going to lower it. And then the upgrades from PACE will net that out. Obviously, it's being more attractive. You can raise rents, things like that. You're investing capital in your project. But when you're they were doing, solar panels, they were doing all the upgrades on the inside. It was an upgrade of an existing building. The way in which that interacts with the financing and the way you approach it and the pros and cons of that are a little bit different. Next slide, please. So I'm going to leave or start off kind of right after Cathy. From a developer side, PACE closings were unlike bridge lenders where you can sit there and nitpick every word in a legal document, new market tax credits where you've got several lawyers. The PACE financings were almost a joy because they're government docs. You can't sit there and dissect them. They're pretty much rubber stamped, just like a tax abatement program agreement. So the actual closing of it, there really wasn't a lot of room for negotiation or review. You just had to make sure that everything was signed off on. The PACE providers really walk you through the process. The administrators have their legal in tow. I mean, with so many other balls in the air with development, the PACE financing portion of the closing was something I did not have to worry about as a developer. The interest is always escrowed at closing, and we always were able to fold all the costs of PACE into the loan except for one project. So those were significant positives. We always closed PACE at Advantus at the same time as the main construction loans. So we did not ever run afoul of a few years ago, the main lenders not being notified. Like there was an issue that arose with Midland States Bank and Barrett Bray Academy. We've closed a loan in the last couple of years with Midland States Bank. Lenders in general, even for refinances over the last 4 years, are very comfortable. They're very flexible. I'll refer to something a bit later with an issue we had at the refinance. They're knowledgeable. They're continuing to be so. They recognize the value of the program. And for someone that manages the property after it's done, there's no ongoing compliance aside from sending your financials over. Unlike with tax abatement in new markets where you have to track jobs of all your tenants, your property manager has to know what your rents are and report those out along with all your community impacts and what the ownership is for MBE purposes of your janitorial staff and all that. There is no PACE compliance. LIHTC has quite a bit of it. So that's a significant upside. Next slide, please. So why did we use PACE in our capital stack? Cash at closing, let's be honest. Tax abatements, TIFs, where you've got to bond them out. Historic redevelopment are already tough to pencil out. St. Louis City has its fair share of projects downtown that are under construction. When you're faced with a significant gap, especially right now with costs continuing to go up, the fact that you have cash at close from PACE is by far and away the benefit of the program. I mean, it's another tool. It's a diverse revenue stream. I would be amiss if I didn't just tell you from the very beginning that was the main intent. Obviously, owning the building, being more energy efficient is a significant positive. There's a reason why we all use low flow toilets, why we hang thicker curtains and make sure our building envelopes are tight, because we recognize that is literally just money sinking out through the cracks in the wall. And it's a lower interest rate than most mezz debt and preferred equity. And if you didn't pick up on this from Cathy and Josh's conversations, from a developer side, it's a lot usually easier to source too. There's already all of these programs in place that have the connections made. Once you're able to qualify your project, there are capital providers out there that are specific and they want to do PACE and they're not super concerned. Well, actually they are. They just get filtered out by Josh and Cathy before they would make it to the developer. So it's not like you're having to spend all this time trying to find someone that's like, actually, after going through all this review, I'm not actually comfortable with that area or that project. Next slide, please. Everyone loves pictures. So this was the main building in Laclede's Landing that Advantus did, Peeper Lofts, down right by the Metrolink on First Street. Total project cost of over $16 million, and PACE provided just about $3.5 million. This project was extremely tight financially, had historic tax credits, PACE financing, tax abatement. Every piece of that was extremely vital. There was no residential on Laclede's Landing. PACE was extremely important. We closed 2 assessments. Without every single one of those capital stack pieces, this wouldn't have happened. And it was a major boon for the riverfront in St. Louis. As you can see by the top left photo, it's got the best view. So pace was extremely important for this. Next slide, please. We also did Wilkinson Lofts. This project was completed last year. Almost $8 million in finance and project costs. You can see the difference between 2017 and closing a project in 2020, how much the cost went up. And we had $623,000 in PACE financing. I do want to point out, and one of this will be mentioned on a later slide, but in that top right photo, you can see those are the existing windows. So one of the concerns when you're doing the audits for historic projects is there's certain things we can't do. Those are incredibly inefficient windows, and they're single pane. We can't replace them for 5 years. The National Park Service does not allow it. So you do have to get a bit creative. And there are certain things we couldn't put solar panels on the roof if they're seen from the street. That's not allowed. So obviously, we found a way around it. There's still PACE items, but you're not really able to capture the entire value of the energy efficient incentives like we would if it was a new build or if there wasn't historic tax credits. But obviously, we made it work, and it was a vital source of our capital stack. Next slide, please. Pros, I'm just going to mention again, cash at close. Let's be honest, we all like money. It's not a local or state government incentive. That's very important. This is private funding, especially anymore. Incentives do have a bit of a connotation, especially if you're in, we had a project earlier in Clayton. You can get PACE financing anywhere that has passed the ordinance. Flexible timing of disbursements during construction, depending on the lender. Oftentimes we'd have one PACE eligible item in a draw. So we would just hold it back, pay it with the bridge loans, and then reimburse, which kind of saved everyone a lot of review. Lower energy costs during property management. That's very important for our office and retail tenants, as well as our residential tenants. Just the fact that things were on timers, lights were LED, because we can't restrict residential tenants on how much water they use or how long they leave their lights on. We would love to, but they're paying the bill ultimately. So even though it's not as green, we do everything we could to incentivize them. Fixed rate and non-recourse after construction. That fixed rate was very important, which I will elaborate on more after I do the cons. We always ran into some problems with the energy audits from historic buildings. Again, that ties to we couldn't do solar. We couldn't replace the windows. There was things we couldn't do. So we always had to be very strategic on what we used. Prepayment penalties can be pretty hefty. And there are, depending on how much financing you use, hefty annual assessments. And there's no ramp up period. So they start right when the project begins. When you're doing multifamily, that does cause, especially with the very turbulent nature we've had in the last 3 years, interest rates going up, rental rates going up. But if you've already got tenants in, you can't raise their rent mid-year or mid-lease year. And then the government can change their PACE administrators at any time, and we kind of got caught in the middle of that. I saw, I think he's a later speaker, Peter Phillips in the city of St. Louis was a godsend for me, keeping it straight. That was incredibly helpful, is getting the local contact that is in your municipality. So when interest rates started going up, we had Wilkinson project, especially, that got caught with bridge rates going through the roof. And it was a very tough time for a lot of projects. PACE worked with us, the capital provider worked with us. We were able to squeak by, but being delayed with timing, having the interest run out, didn't just affect PACE, it affected the bridge loans as well. The bankers didn't want to keep raising the rates. Well, that's what they told us anyway. So that was a concern. Obviously, there was no way to plan for that. It's just something with those assessments being on your tax bill. The primary lender is obviously very concerned. They want to know what's going on. So it's very much a relationship in terms of just keeping everyone updated to work through it. Next slide, please. So unplanned upsides and lesson learned. Historic projects in general, there was a kind of a balance between getting enough energy savings for energy audits to qualify, but not spending so much on these upgrades that the rents couldn't support it without turning your project into a higher caliber project. And what I mean by that is we were upper middle class nice. We had granite countertops. We weren't pulling in $250 a square foot in rent, and we didn't want to. We didn't want to tap into that market. Advantis does not want to compete with Ballpark, the tower at Ballpark Village or 100 Above the Park, where your rents start out at like $3,000 for one bedroom. Obviously, we have 4 projects, all residential. PACE was used, significant upgrades. One of them did actually manage to finagle and get solar panels in a portion of the roof where they couldn't be seen from the street. That was quite the balancing act with historic tax credits, but we made it work, so it is possible. Luckily, flat roof on an old gym made it possible. It's also very hard to do rooftop decks, so it's not just solar panels. There are good architects out there that know what they're doing. The fixed rate was very important. Those bridge terms that float during construction almost doubled in about a year and a half. And with Missouri, you've got to apply to the state. There's this lead time between when you're done with the project, getting through SHPO, which was incredibly backed up, and then getting your tax credits monetized. That was a nail biter across the entire project. I don't know of anyone that went under, well, some of them were underwater for a little bit, but I don't know of anything that got foreclosed upon or anything like that. So just speaking in general to how the lenders for PACE, the lenders for the banks and the developers are able to work together during COVID, especially the main lenders, when they're subordinate to it, that's something they're not necessarily used to all the time. Just being able to navigate that speaks highly to the program and how the different partners work together. We had the unfortunate timing to try to pay off 2 PACE loans in December. I don't know, it recently changed last year and I haven't done one this year, so the direct bill may be a bit different. But the way PACE works, the way it used to, and I'm sure it's this way in some other municipalities outside of Missouri, is the bill's due in December. Sorry, I feel like I keep getting this closer to my mouth. The bill's due in December, but the capital provider doesn't receive their money until March. But if you don't pay it in December, you're delinquent on your taxes, but they're not going to release the lien. So you've got to double pay it and then wait for a refund. We paid off a loan December 28th, and that was possible. It was required capital to be held off the books until it was reimbursed. Timing is what timing is, but that was something that I don't think there's a way around. It's just because it's on a calendar year basis. And I did put a disclaimer in there. I don't think that's probably going to be an issue in the city of St. Louis going forward, but it was just something that we ran into. Next slide, please. So final thoughts. And this kind of speaks more to PACE in general in Missouri, coming from someone that works with national developers. Tax abatement, IDA bonds, and other local incentives are subject to differing political whims and desires in each jurisdiction. And what I mean by that is, until you get someone boots on the ground, you don't know if a community, maybe they don't like TIF, they want to encourage SIDS, or if you're in a certain area, you're not going to get tax abatement, you're not going to get assistance. You just don't know. Everyone's different. It's constantly changing with different people in power. And when you're a national developer that's not done anything in a certain area, to just see that they have PACE as a tool, because they're relatively similar in each jurisdiction across the country, it's a positive for attracting developers, just because they know, okay, I kind of know enough about this. It's a good tool and it's marketable. especially as costs continue to go up and capital stacks continue to get tighter. It's a very valuable tool. I wouldn't be here if I didn't think so. I know for a fact Advantis is continuing to use it in their ongoing projects. They've got one that I believe it's in currently, because I do keep in contact with them. And Steadfast as well. We've got a developer in Ohio. I'm like, well, you need, and actually it was a referral from Josh. He told me about the Ohio program and that it was one of the best in the country. And they're a developer that just opened a hotel in downtown St. Louis. So Pace, having Missouri, having St. Louis County, City, Jackson County, all these places attached to Pace for people that have capital and developers that are coming into the state is incredibly worthwhile. And the last thing I'll mention, and it ties more to COVID and just the last 3 years, was just crazy, for lack of a better word. That first year's assessment is something that we had to watch closely just because, apartment lease up, this isn't Nashville and I don't want it to be by any stretch of the imagination, just until that cash flow comes in. And as we were modeling projects 2 years before they opened, that was something that we just watched. Obviously we powered through and there were no issues, but that was just, I think, the biggest takeaway when I was making up notes for this, because it does, being superior to the main lender, it's almost something that you're hyper aware about, because that main lender is who you're going to have on other projects and they typically loan the most money. So just keeping them happy and aware is always important. And that's all I got. Thank you. Oh, we have a new mic stand. After I suffered.
Sorry. Testing. Testing, testing. Next slide, please. Click through. Oh. All right, so thank you, Jacob. So yeah, because of our streamlined process, which we've worked really hard at, we even got an award for, that is no longer a problem. We are able to, we stay in communication with our third-party biller, Amerinat, and we're able to make sure that at any points people want to pay off or there's any delays or anything like that, we stay in communication with the property owner, with the biller, as well as with any party, the lenders as well. So the role of us as administrators is ensuring that the PACE program's implementation is in line with state and local enabling legislation and program guidelines. We also do municipality outreach, property owner outreach, PACE education, aka the PACE Summit, as well as other things. And our goal is to get the project to the finish line in accordance to the laws and the statute. Next slide. So Josh went over this and he did an awesome job, so we're not going to go into it that much. But basically, it says here that we start with the application. I always stress, please get me a interest form. It helps us keep knowledgeable about what projects we have in our pipeline. It helps us plan and make sure that we have all of the local ordinances in place. It helps me communicate with our city officials, and it makes the closing process that much easier. We're not stressing, we're not running around. We know when the project's going to close, are very close in a window of close. And then we kind of go from there. So I always will encourage property owners or lenders, please just get me an interest form with a little bit of information. It allows me to help you out as much as possible. So yeah, we do our reviews. We'll go into this a little bit more, but this is kind of our overview. And it goes down to our third party collect your bills or property owner. That's something we're always in contact with Amerinat with, and letting them know when we close a project, letting the lender know the expectations of what documentations that we need. And yeah, and it's a very smooth process. Next slide, please. So yeah, interest form. I made a whole slide about it because I think they're that much important. So with property owners, your interest form, whenever it comes to me, indicates that you have this project, you're interested in PACE. Most likely at that point, I've spoken to you and we've talked about PACE and how it might be a fit for your project. It initiates the process of me connecting you with our open market system. So I'm able to send it out to the capital providers that would be the best fit for your project. So capital providers let us know what their limits are in terms of how much they can fund or how much they will fund. And then so I send it out. And once I send it out, I let them I give them your contact and they communicate with you and I will keep checking in to make sure that your project is moving along. If you hit any hurdles, I will be probably messaging Josh to figure out what we can do to get you across the finish line, because we want PACE, well, whoever wants to use PACE to be able to use PACE. And if you hit any hurdles, don't hesitate to call us, reach out. You are not bothering any of us. Yep, but interest forms. And then for capital providers and lenders, it ensures that a local ordinance is in place. I think last year we were able to do 1 in 2 weeks, but that is not normal. It normally takes a lot longer than that. It takes a lot, sometimes months at a time, a year of talking and communicating with local government officials to make sure that that local ordinance is in place. They know what PACE is. They feel comfortable with it. And so, yeah, if you let us know that you might have one next year, we will make sure that that local ordinance is in place and we're working on it. And then it leads to a more efficient application process. So making sure that we already have the local ordinance as well as we have the information about your project. We know whether or not it's probably going to be in the standard range, which means that we can finish in about 7 days, sometimes quicker. Won't promise that though. But we get to know and we set the expectations of you as well as the property owner of knowing how long things will take. We like to over communicate that. And then it gives us a more accurate picture of our project pipeline. So it helps us know what projects are going to come, what places we need to do more outreach, because it's about community. It's about building this community, this PACE community. And if we know what our pipeline is, we know what things we can do to better our program. And that's one thing that we are really devoted to, is making sure that we have the best program that we can. Next slide. So application process. So we have an online form now on each of our websites. So in our 3 districts, you can go on. Actually, our online forms, you most likely will have to contact me, because at that point I have to send that to you. It's a specialized one. That's another reason you give me an interest form. So I know when you need that application form, I know when to contact you. It connects directly to our database. So it makes that process that much more efficient, because I'm not having to enter in small spreadsheets or anything like that. It goes right into our system. And then these are a couple of other documents, making sure that you have your draft assessment in to me, as well as that energy audit or analysis, making sure that you are meeting the SIR, or the savings investment ratio. And a few things here, we also have lender consent. So making sure that the mortgage lender has consented to PACE. Making sure they understand what PACE is. And that's something that we are able to help you out on that process as well. On if you need help explaining it or communicating what that means to a senior lender, we are here. And again, I will send you to Josh. And then right of first refusal, which is something that some states do not hear of or understand what it is. Here in Missouri, a Missouri lender must basically be offered the opportunity to fund for PACE. We have to make sure that there is a no basically on the books. And so if your mortgage lender is a Missouri based or they have Missouri ties, that's something that they can also give you. But if not, that is something that you would have to seek out, and we can help you with giving you a form or an example of what a right of first refusal is. And a few things needed at closing is just a disbursement agreement, a copy of the note, final term sheet, the final assessment contract. So that means that final numbers, it's done. You have your schedule attached to it. We need that. And then that construction loan agreement if needed. Next slide. So we now, all three clean energy boards have a standard project approval process. And I am very happy about that. That's something, again, like it helps our process be a lot more streamlined. It lets lenders and properties owners know what to expect from us. We have very busy schedules. Our board members also do as well. And sometimes scheduling is hard. But if you have a project that is under 10 million, loan to value ratio up to 90, PACE loan to value ratio up to 25%, you use the standardized assessment contract. So making sure that it is very close to our standard assessment contract, not too many changes or anything like that. And then it doesn't engage the Clean Energy Development Board to engage in direct financing of the project. For city, St. Louis City, we also have that the project must be in good standing. Standardized is anything outside of the normal. So again, as we are talking and we are learning what the lender would like to do with the project, sometimes it might fall outside of the standard project, and we will let you know as soon as we know that it would probably be a non-standard and we would need to call upon the board. So therefore, we have really good boards that will probably get you in sooner than the 30 days, but with the summertime, sometimes that might not happen. So we say expect up to 30 to 45 days. Just being very conservative with that, but a lot of times we have really good responsive boards that will get you in sooner. Next slide. So approval, just really quickly going over, we talked about it before, making sure that it's an eligible project, property, that savings to investment ratio, which goes with the energy savings. It could also be operation and maintenance savings, or avoided capital costs. And that could all go towards the savings for a project. Next slide, please. So MEI will approve the project if it complies with state statute and eligibility criteria. We also will have a legal review being done at the same time. So making sure that you have those documents in helps us ensure. I do not provide it to our council until I get a complete packet, because then I can look through and make sure there's nothing missing. Then I will give it to our legal, and they will provide a review of the process as well. Once that's done, you will receive a closing certificate for a standard project. For non-standards, upon approval, for the Show Me PACE, you will receive the closing certificate again. But with the city as well as the county of St. Louis, you will receive a closing certificate as well as the resolution that the board has voted on. Next slide. Then once it's filed, it will place an assessment on the property. That's when we're working with our, at that point, working with our third-party collector, Marinat, to set up the billing directly to the property owner. And counties love it. Most people love it. The only one that varies from that is Jackson County, where they handle their own billing. And that's it. Visit us on our websites. There's 4 of them. There's plenty of information. But like I said, we're here if you would like to speak to us. And that's it. Any questions? And I don't see any online.
Fantastic. Thank you, Patrice. If the three of you want to come back up, I do have a couple of questions for the three of you. So there's another chair over there. So what we have here is the entire perspective of a PACE project, right? So that property owner who is really looking at what are the dollar and cents going to look like, pardon me, a capital provider and developer. Cathy's worked on both sides as a developer themselves, contractor, as well as a funder on that end. And then obviously with Patrice understands what we have to go through. So I guess a question that I have is for each of you, tell us what you think is we'll start with this, an example of the hardest thing you had to deal with PACE and how you felt it was overcome either internally or from a external party. You're the last one. There's no one else I hit it to.
Well, I'm just going to go and talk about a project. I don't want to say what PACE provider, but there is a difference in the PACE providers that you're going to, utilize. One, I had an issue because when it was originally given a term sheet and letter of intent, not everything was underwritten up front. And we got to the 12th hour and the guidelines changed. And with that, I was told your project went from 3 million to 1.4, and it left me scrambling. So, and this was a deal that was closing an acquisition, new construction, self-storage facility, and the deal was going to blow up. So it was a lot of pressure. I didn't tell the sponsor what was going on because I knew it was a good deal. So I just had to farm it out, and that's how I came upon PACE Equity. They issued a term sheet, actually a commitment within 72 hours. We funded that project in 45 days. So it makes a big difference on who you're working with, and that you have accurate information given up front. Because now what I have been doing is we get everything up front. We're looking at debt servicing ratios. We're looking at financials. We're looking at the eligible spend. When it's given to me, I'm actually taking that construction budget and I'm pulling it apart. And I'm looking at everything that I can apply towards PACE, whether it's maybe drywall to go along with the insulation, a crane to go because it's 4 stories to be used for the rooftop. I'm pulling apart the soft cost. I'm looking at the ratios that we can add for the soft cost. So we get really in depth because when it goes to commitment, we want to fund it. And that's where I got stuck from a project, but that project was actually a success.
And that's very interesting. It's not for everyone. That's not the first time that's happened. Our program has experienced that in the past. For those of you not aware, right, the lenders that are the capital providers that are party to PACE, not all of them have their own funding. They access funding from other entities. And so that underwriting, you may be talking with Cathy and PACE Equity, not to put them on the spot and suggest this is accurate, but she's in front of you, so I'm going to use it. That PACE Equity may be using someone else's money, and that those other people change their underwriting standards. And then that then comes back to Cathy and PACE Equity and puts them in a bind. 2 years ago, our district changed our policy for all new capital providers where we ask who that back-end funder is, what their underwriting requirements are, and what their agreement is on how quickly they can change those underwriting agreements. So in other words, in Cathy's example, because we had this in Kansas City, where it happened 48 hours before close, the back-end funder decided they didn't want to do it. So knowing that an agreement between PACE Equity and their back-end funder, they have, 90 days is the timeline that the back-end funder can change their criteria of what they're going to fund. And that way, both PACE Equity and we know that the property owner is going to be kept safe and that project's going to continue because we've got that cushion. So I think it's a great example of what PACE Equity has been able to do and the role they play, but then, obviously the fortitude, but the problems that the specialty financing that we're dealing with, but that a role of an administrator and the different parties can play here is to make sure that if we see a problem, we try to address it. So I'm actually really glad that you brought that up because it is something we've seen and are trying to address. So thank you.
Thanks.
Jacob, what's the biggest hurdle that you have faced or you see out there for PACE?
That's a good question. Well, yeah, there's been several. The banks and the lender consent, that was a big issue, especially a couple of years ago. As I talked about COVID and just what that year one assessment did. I think the reason I'm having trouble is we've never, once the deal has been funded, we've never had any like blow up issues like that. Like that stuff has typically happened before. So from a developer side, either we've just been incredibly lucky, which that could be the case. I'm not, oh well. We never have had any major concerns. Closing our last project that I didn't have photos up there of it. That was one of those where the energy audit did have to be massaged. I don't know what occurred. That was another historic renovation. One of the big problems was we weren't replacing windows. And that's because someone bought the building in the 90s and put in new windows, which exempted us from having to keep the historic single pane, but we weren't spending any money on it. And I think there was like 300 windows in the building. So there were certain things we weren't doing that didn't need to be done. And then with the historic guidelines, that was a hurdle, but it didn't prevent the project from happening. It didn't prevent any issues, but it was just probably the biggest issue we had once that capital provider had been established. It had been underwritten. That does flush out so much. It's just nice knowing that once you get past that, the deal is essentially from our side, it never fell apart. Either we needed PACE in there and it worked or it didn't. So just the players in the field have worked very well together. The changes that Patrice mentioned and Josh mentioned in the beginning, improving the program, it's one of the easiest to work with, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Patrice, what have you seen as the biggest hurdles that our property owners and capital providers, or that you've seen in general across the network? What hurdles are there you see?
I think PACE knowledge or education is still a hurdle. I know we've had projects almost die just by not having, or people not being all the way informed about PACE, whether it be knowing what things are qualified in an energy audit. And that's something that Josh and I had to jump on a call and try to save a project before it was possibly dying. And we were able to get that project across the finish line just by spending some time talking with the energy auditor, explaining to them what the statute says, and I guess being able to problem solve together as a team. And that's something I feel like I want to always stress is the MEI team's definitely here for you at each step of the process. And we're willing to like back you up in any of the education talks or any of the talks that you have with anybody across the field. And I think one ongoing hurdle is just being able to finance small projects. And that's something that Josh is working on, Matt's working on, being able to offer PACE to people that need it, smaller projects as well as rural projects as well.
That's great. I do want to use that last comment there. It is vital, right? We are not only the administrators checking the work, getting it approved. We are here to help facilitate things. So, Jacob, you mentioned the tough times in COVID. I can tell you one of the premier benefits of being able to have a third-party servicer like Amerinet and not use the county, and we experience this in the city, but we have it in others, is the flexibility it provides. The capital providers aren't looking in PACE to foreclose on anybody. But a county collector has, because of their technology and rules and other things, are more rigid and limited in what they can provide. But with our servicer, we've been able to work with capital providers to delay payments and remove interest rates. We've been able to do flex payments when certain municipalities don't have the technology to allow that. So, we are here to be a problem solver. If you have partners that aren't aware of PACE and you feel that you're trying to explain it, we can do that. You have a community you think that there's a bunch of different projects in, we can come in and talk to them as well. So I think Patrice hit the nail on the head when she mentioned that we are a team of resources for you. And I'm glad, Jacob, you mentioned Ohio, because I, as the administrator of MEI, also chair 2 national administrator groups. So there is literally not a program in the country that I am not connected to or talk to on a regular basis. So if you got colleagues or partners there, that's something that we can help connect with. We don't get anything out of it. It's simply PACE's number one problem, as Patrice mentioned, is just awareness. So if we can help you and your colleagues and team do that, please don't hesitate to let us know. And we'll get on a phone. We can set up meetings and answer those problems. There is one question online, and we'll get that, and then we will take our break before our 11 o'clock.
Okay, so yeah, we do have one question here online. It reads as follows. The initial slide mentioned governmental as a viable industry, but I believe you said there hadn't been any governmental projects implemented. Can you clarify what, if any, governmental entities could or could not utilize PACE funding?
Cathy, was that on yours or our slide? No, okay.
That could possibly. It was on the ones that could possibly be done.
Yeah, so to the online viewers question, governmental properties are eligible technically and legally, but interest rates currently prohibit that. So that is the difference. We still list them because it's possible, but local municipalities can bond at such a low rate that PACE at this point isn't able to address that. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, so we have about 5 minutes until our 11 o'clock. So we're going to take a quick break until we have, it is for those here, it is going to be a virtual presentation. So no one here is going to be here for that. But we have a great presentation from the city of Kansas City and the city of St. Louis to talk about the economic impacts of PACE. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Cathy. Thank you, Patrice.